We're going to begin today by learning the tricks of a rather special trade.
Health, and so today I've chosen dried spinach.
Fire 1.
Rocket 2.
The crew is busy. The command pilot has time for only this brief reflection. I'd like to argue with them about going home, but I don't know how we can. That was all.
Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird.
Once the difficulty was corrected, we could take time out to realize that Gemini 8 had brought us closer to lunar exploration by demonstrating the first successful dock in space. Gemini 8 also gave many of us our first look at men like the three young rescue swimmers, Airman Neal and Moore and Staff Sergeant Hewitt, as well as the captain and crew of the Mason. Stations, doing their duty and doing it well.
Now, let's take a look at your new face.
It's an amazing technique, Max, but the face is all wrong.
But Chief, Dr. Proctor himself said this is a perfect face for a secret agent.
Because they're on the level.
$2,000 to see the dance. Sounds good. Let's cue that music and gentlemen, get dancing.
Come on, Buzz.
Bam, that's the band. Bam, that's another band. And what I do,
And it's like magic. Dried spinach and spinach ready to eat.
What happened to be outnumbered?
How do you figure that? You are 3, we are 3.
And the Ohm's thrusters are lost. He then switches to the re-entry control system to maintain attitude control. The computer has a solid-state, random access memory capable of storing over 160,000 information bits. Period of re-entry when the heat builds up. A roll rate of 15 degrees cancels out normal spacecraft lift. Starting from re-entry velocity of Mach number 25, temperature of the atmosphere immediately in front of the heat shield builds up to approximately 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Temperature of the bond line between the shield and the structure was measured at 225 degrees. It was designed to withstand over 500 degrees. The roll rate now stops.
From Cape Kennedy, astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan aboard, will be inserted into orbit in a little more than 6 minutes. At that time, their orbital speed will be 17,500 miles an hour, and they will have achieved orbit. The chase of the Agena target vehicle begins. A 70,000-mile chase will be completed on the third orbit, one orbit sooner than before in the other Gemini mission. Initially, the ATDA will be in circular orbit 185 miles high. It's achieved that now. Gemini in elliptical orbit 100 by 168 miles. Gemini behind by some 700 miles. 50 minutes after liftoff, the first Gemini maneuver takes place. The spacecraft nears its first apogee then, or its high point. The thrusters are fired and the catch-up rate is reduced. At this time, Gemini trails the target by 480 miles. And this shows how the two orbits are changed in relation to each other by that first Gemini maneuver. Now, 1 hour and 6 minutes later, the second maneuver takes place. That adjusts the catch-up rate again, the altitude, and brings the Gemini closer to the target plane. Now, Gemini trails its target by a little more than 200 miles. And again, our animation shows how the firing of the Gemini thrusters will affect the relationship between the two spacecraft. You see how the Gemini is now at one point touching the orbit of the other. Now comes a third and very important Gemini maneuver, 2 hours and 20 minutes into the flight, near the high point on the second revolution of the Earth. This purpose to circularize finally that Gemini orbit at 168 miles high. That's 168 miles nautical, or 185 miles statute miles, and bring it into the same orbit approximately. Take that back. That's 168 statute miles. It brings it into the same orbit as the target vehicle, but below it. It's 150 miles behind and 17 miles below now. Now it's time for the radar to send out signals, lock on to the receiving transponder on the target. And it's almost 2.5 hours into the flight, and the terminal phase of the final catch-up's beginning. The Gemini spacecraft is closing rapidly on its target. As night falls, the Gemini crew can see a light aboard the target vehicle there in the distance, as you noticed. Now Gemini moves in. The onboard computers helping the crew make small corrective burns. The radar is functioning also. Finally, as the range closes to less than 5 miles, the crew begins a semi-optical approach to the target. That means they look at it, but they also use their instruments. Rendezvous will be achieved over the Indian Ocean near Australia. Now, when the Gemini spacecraft and the target are only about 50 feet apart, they'll start flying in formation. That is, just 50 feet apart. They'll fly around the world at 17,500 miles an hour until the actual docking begins over Hawaii. Now, slowly, the Gemini will close the final few feet until it nudges together with the target. Moves in there. Wally Schirra said it's about like parking your car in a garage. But the vehicles are moving 17,500 miles an hour. However, at this point, in their relative speed, is just about 1/3 of a mile an hour. And into the docking collar. That has to be done slowly and carefully, of course. Gemini 8 proved docking could be done, and the Gemini 9 crew are confident they're going to be successful. In actuality, there'll be more than one docking exercise in this flight. There are going to be a total of 9. The maneuver is going to be repeated many times to give these pilots, Stafford and Cern, a chance to try their hand and their skill at it. So this will be a familiar configuration for a good part of the flight of Gemini 9. You've seen how docking's accomplished now. Well, with the flight of Gemini 9, the launch here some 14 minutes away. The countdown is T-11 or 10 now of 10:57, but there's a 3-minute hold in there. So it's about 13 minutes and 52 seconds to launch. Jack Siegel at IBM standing by to explain the relation of speed and altitude in these complicated maneuvers. Jack?
Walter, we have a couple of displays, demonstrations that we can use to give you an idea of the relationship of speed versus altitude. Here, the computer has generated a display showing the Earth in the center and 3 Gemini spacecraft at various orbital levels. Now, let's start them in motion. And you'll see almost immediately that the one closest to Earth is moving fastest. The one furthest away is moving slowest. Now, let's stop for a minute to give you a better look. This is not because the one closest to Earth has the least distance to travel. It is actually moving faster. It has to move faster to stay away from the pull of gravity. It is continually falling in towards the Earth. The gravity attraction is stronger here, and so it moves the fastest to counteract that. Now, we have another display over here, a demonstration that we can use to give you an idea of the relationship of speed versus altitude. This surface has been shaped so that a ball moving around it acts somewhat like a planet moving around the sun or a satellite around the Earth. The surface is something like a wide cone, and the velocity that this ball has helps it stay up and counteract the pull of gravity. The surface friction of the ball and the cone actually act like the Earth's atmosphere to take velocity away from it, and it gradually goes back down in towards the Earth. Now let me show, here is, for instance, the ATDA in a high circular orbit, and here's the Agena. Now watch, you'll see the Agena's caught up, it is passed, now it is catching up again. Anything in a lower orbit is moving faster. We're able to get this across fairly easily with this demonstration. Now, Walter, we have one other thing that we can show you. Down in Houston recently, I was explaining this conical surface demonstration to astronaut Tom Stafford and trying to describe it to him, and he said, well, why don't you show something else that anybody can do in their homes? So here's something for any of your viewers.
These days, small cars can make a lot of sense. And here's one that makes more sense than most. New Holden Gemini, the little car full of big ideas. For convenience, Gemini comes complete with a single stalk that carries your trafficators, headlight dimmer, headlight and hazard warning light controls. They're all there, right at your fingertips. And see that control next to the horn button on the wheel? It's your windshield wiper and washer switch, right where you want it. Let's see how our family in the SL sedan are making out. And it's here, when you're off the beaten track, that Gemini really shines. It's Holden tested, and that means you can trust it to go and keep going over any sort of road surface. That four-coil suspension really works when it comes to soaking up the bumps, leaving you to ride in smooth comfort.